we should put it right up front, and we're going to put it right up front. My one piece of advice, which I got back in film school and is always and only gets more true every year I write, which is write the experience.
Hi, I'm Chas Fisher.
And I'm Stu Willis.
And welcome to Draft Zero, a podcast where two Aussie filmmakers try to work out what makes great screenplays work.
I thought you were going to do the emerging filmmakers so I can make the gag that will segue us into this episode. Because we've been emerging screenwriters for over 5 years now. Well, more than 5 years, but we've been doing this podcast for 5 years.
Yes.
At this point. Over 5 years. And it's time for our annual, we only now do it once a year, Backmatter. Once upon a time, this used to be Frontmatter, and we used to do the front of the episodes, and then we used to do it at the back, and now we decided to wrap it up and stick it into one episode so people can download it and never listen to it, which is fine. If you stop listening now, that is cool. Just continue to download us.
So this is, like, just for the uninitiated, our Backmatter episodes are where so as a guiding principle in us recording Draft Zero, we've tried to take an empirical approach to solving problems that we come across in our own writing and filmmaking craft, and we pick great examples from films that we love, and we try and break them down and apply them to our own writing. But as the years have gone by, we feel that there is, as much as we try to not hold out our opinions as gospel or anything like that, that there's value in us talking about our careers and our processes and where we're at. And they've, as you said, have ended up bundled together as Backmatter.
Yeah, I guess it's an opportunity for us to keep it real and remind every people that as much as we are cishet white men with authoritative sounding voices, we're not that authoritative. But don't tell other people in our lives that, or potential employers. We're heaps authoritative. We know exactly how to fix this script.
Well, I do love when I follow tons of writers on Twitter and listen to tons of writing podcasts, and I love it when really successful professional writers are upfront about their struggles and all the projects that they've had fail. I mean, for those of you who haven't heard it, you must listen to the Children of Tendu double-header episode on pitching. They recorded an entire pitch that they put together, which felt like months and months of writing work, and talked about the different studios that they took it to and how the pitch was received and how that process worked. And that was just, to me, such amazing insight.
Which is a terrible comparison, because I'm not sure we're going to offer anything like that. No amazing insights here. Kind of more, we're going to keep it real about what it's like to be a screenwriter that's not in LA and not really making stuff.
Don't take Stu seriously. We had literally recently, so Stu's often self-deprecating. We've had a new listener just say, "Oh, I stopped listening to you when Stu said that he hasn't done any writing recently," and it's like, oh.
Yes, I do. I haven't done any writing, and we'll get to that topic. I haven't done any writing because it's been, to be honest, 2019 has been the year of hell for me. I just think it's just going to keep getting worse. But, you know, I handed in 2 scripts at the beginning of the year that were both probably proper real jobs. May have 2 scripts going into production. And I'm saying that up front because one of those scripts that is nearly going into production has nearly been going into production for like 3 or 4 years. But it seems pretty likely, like I've seen the potential cast list and all that stuff. So excitement. But, you know, it says a lot about screenwriting, I think, and the need for, lack of a better word, social proof, that we believe people who have got produced material, and we don't. But as most of writers will say, a lot of the job of writing will never get seen. You know, it's the tip of the iceberg that gets made.
Yeah.
But we're kind of going a little bit off topic of what we want to discuss here. I guess that is us trying to offer up some social proof about why you should still listen to us talking Backmatter. Which is, yes, we're working on stuff. I write, Chas writes, stuff is moving forward. Which is, this is 5 years of Draft Zero presented us an opportunity to kind of reflect upon 5 years of doing this podcast, not in a patting ourselves on the back way, but as an opportunity to kind of reflect upon our own writing processes and kind of, this is the bit where it gets slightly wanky, how Draft Zero fits into how other people practice, into the practices of other writers that dip in and out of this podcast, because I think there's probably an audience that has been with us for a long time, but I also suspect that there are writers who get excited about screenwriting, probably try to learn as much as they can at the beginning when they're starting, and they keep at it at 2 years and realize that screenwriting is really hard, and they either drop off or they fade or ghost, like they're doing online dating, you know, and they're dating someone who just like slowly ghosts them, and they feel that way about screenwriting. So for us, with 55, 56, 57 episodes, let's just say 55 because let's not count the first two. It's like Quentin Tarantino's first film was not Reservoir Dogs. He doesn't mention that, you know. Or for those who listen to thrash metal, Pantera never mentioned their first 3 glam albums. They only really existed after Phil Anselmo arrived on the scene. It was kind of like that. Let's just ignore those 2 episodes. So this is kind of an opportunity for us to discuss kind of the practicalities of how we approach writing, how Draft Zero has changed that, potentially offer some guidance for those that are beginning their writing journey, or and possibly not a primer. I'm trying to think another word for those that have been listening the whole way, but kind of a moment of reflection. What is it? That thing? It's like a dissertation. It's kind of like reflective writing if you do like creative work at like a master's or PhD level, and you have to do an exegesis. That's the term. That's an opportunity for you to reflect and perform your own exegesis. Oh my God.
So, Stu, how has 5 years of Draft Zero changed how you write?
Do you want to start that? Because I just ranted without a breath for like a minute.
Sure. I'll ask myself that question.
Hey, Chas, how has 5 years of Draft Zero changed your writing?
It's really hard to tell, to be honest. My writing has gotten a lot better. What I can really tell from Draft Zero is my feedback to other writers has improved immensely, because now I can articulate in useful terms, much more precise terms, what I feel is or is not working about other people's work and how I would go about fixing it and presenting options to do that without being prescriptive or giving examples, but rather approaches. And I feel that because of that, I can't help but imagine that also feeds into my own writing as well, so that when I get feedback and they're saying this and this isn't working, then I've got much more tools at my disposal to figure out, all right, well, the problem isn't right there, it's actually way back over here, and I need to tweak that scene and layer this stuff in and seed that earlier and swap those 2 scenes around. And it's, I think, like all things, you know, you listen to script notes and they throw out so much knowledge offhandedly, and it's just because they've been writing for so long that it's
offhand.
That it's just part and parcel of their process. And I've not to say that I'm in any way at that level, but it's certainly, I don't have to go back now and re-listen to some of our episodes, say on tactics or scene transitions, because those are things that I'm now sort of automatically doing. So the most recent pilot, the most recent pilot I've written, I wrote it in 2 weeks. The structure has not changed at all, and it's only taken 3 polishes for me to go to market with it, which is very, very different.
3 seems like a lot.
Yeah?
No, I'm just being facetious.
Well, no, like
Stuicious.
All my other projects, they just go through numerous drafts, like complete restructuring, taking it back to cards, putting it back together, pass upon pass upon pass to improve and improve and improve. And yeah. Anyway, so how has Draft Zero improved your writing, Stu?
Okay, so before I answer that question, I'm going to reflect on the offhandedly, because I think this is the goal for me. So I'm going to relate it to my editing day job, because I've worked in post-production for a long time. So I went into an agency that I've been working remotely for last week. And one of their junior editors was like, "Oh, wow, you're the infamous Stu. I really love your work." You know, she's like second year out of uni. And she's like, "How long have you been editing for?" And I'm like, "Oh, I learned how to..." First started editing, like playing around with editing on super VHS tape-to-tape decks in like the mid-90s. And then I'm like, "Oh, so..." But, you know, professionally, maybe 15 years? And she's like, "Wow, do you still love it?" I'm like, I don't know if love's the right word. But what I've found is, as you get older, like you realize the value of experience, and this is where I like my writing to go, is that I no longer think about the craft of editing. I do think about it in the moment, but I don't no longer stay up late at night going, "Oh, is that a good edit?" I can find the cut points. I can find the technicalities to make something work easier. What makes me valuable for an employer is, because I work in advertising, is that I have very high level conversations about messaging. And in fact, I probably even have a conversation about what is it you're trying to communicate at a level beyond, like ask questions of the marketing people and the creatives that they haven't even thought about, right? And they definitely, I'm not saying that I do it all myself. They provide guidance. I just have a visual literacy in relation to editing they do not have. So I can sit there and go, this communicates this, A communicates this, B communicates this, which do you prefer, right? And I think at some point, particularly with people like John and Craig, that is what they're actually doing. That's where you want your writing to be, right? Like you want to be able to go, this is my idea and I know how to execute it.
Yeah.
Right? And so much of what we've been trying to do at Draft Zero, as much as we talk about what we're doing as narrative aesthetics, and I'm going to use that word because we're going to talk about aesthetics later on, that what we are trying to get people to do is think about stuff on an execution level. What is it that I want the audience to feel, and what can I do to achieve that? And I think Draft Zero overall has made me a lot more conscious of that, and also more subconscious. So when I'm writing scenes, I don't think about that stuff. We wrote a double banger pilot, Matt and I, look, there a lot of had gone in. Our scene breakdown was extensive, but we wrote a draft and a polish of a double banger pilot in like 3 weeks, and it went to market, and it's good. But the feedback we're getting on it is nothing to do with our craft. It's absolutely to do with the direction of the material. And to me, that is a good sign. When people are coming back to you, commenting on your writing, not in terms of, shit, this doesn't make sense, but is this where we want the project to go? That's a good sign, right? That's a sign that our writing on a very basic mechanical level is working. Fundamentally, you want to ask me what Draft Zero has taught me, and me reading a whole bunch of unproduced screenplays, is that most people don't know how to write a scene, that the basics of screenwriting is scene work. But the problem is getting through a whole feature script means you need to learn the macro as well. You need to understand how to write structure so you can see through writing 20-something thousand words and 100 pages, but what is going to make it work for the reader is scenes.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's kind of like it in a nutshell.
Well,
I've read enough first draft scripts that you read the first fucking 2 pages and you're like, they can't even write a scene. I'm not going to read the rest. It doesn't matter if they have their midpoint. That doesn't matter if they've got this killer third act. If you can't write a scene that holds my attention, it actually doesn't matter.
Yeah. And to your point, that I think that's another thing that's improved in my feedback is when I get a script and there's something that's not working for me, what I'll say to the writer is, this is what I think you're going for, but this is how it's landing with me. And I then don't give them feedback as to how to change that moment because clearly they want it. What I then discuss is, what you need to do to make that moment do what I think you want it to do.
Yeah, I think, and this kind of relates to aesthetics, I think for a lot of people when they're starting out, I don't think it's the Ira Glass, the gap. We'll put a link into the show notes. It's like the shadow version of the gap.
Nobody tells people who are beginners, and I really wish somebody had told this to me, is that all of us who do creative work, like, you know, we get into it, and we get into it because we have good taste. But it's like there's a gap that for the first couple of years that you're making stuff, what you're making isn't so good, okay? It's not that great. It's trying to be good. It has ambition to be good, but it's not quite that good. But your taste, the thing that got you into the game, your taste is still killer. And your taste is good enough that you can tell that what you're making is kind of a disappointment to you. You know what I mean? A lot of people never get past that phase. A lot of people at that point, they quit.
The shadow version of the gap, which is that I think a lot of people see their intent, not their execution.
Yeah.
So that often they'll get offended that people didn't understand their script because they understand their script, and therefore you're an idiot for not understanding their script. They're actually, the craft lies in the ability to read your own material. And this is something we all have to learn, to read your own material objectively and see what you've written, not what you intended.
Yeah.
To communicate. What did you actually say, not what you intended to say? I mean, fuck, that's good advice for life, right?
Yeah, which is not to say that I can do that, but I built it into my process where I send it to people and get back from them what isn't working, what isn't landing the way that I want it to land.
Maybe it's now, unless we can like pat ourselves on the back some more. Like transgression. I'm always transgressing. Digress. Or segue into how we used to approach writing 5 years ago and how I approach it now. Because I think if there are listeners that are starting with Draft Zero because they've heard about us and they're hitting play on this episode, let's be honest. If Draft Zero is very erratic, we kind of ice skate from topic to topic based on what is interested Chas and I. And as over the 5 years of us writing, you can kind of see our interests have gone from the very kind of not, I mean, is status transactions basics? I kind of think status transactions are basic now.
Yeah.
But, you know, midpoints and point of view and these kind of fundamental building blocks to kind of more esoteric topics. I mean, antagonism doesn't sound esoteric, but then we found a way to make it esoteric. You know, that there is something to be said about how we would just literally approach the nuts and bolts of writing a screenplay. You know, just say you're a novelist, and we've had a few novelists listen to us. You know, they understand story, but they don't understand screenplays. So how did you approach screenwriting? I mean, as much as you can remember 5 years ago, and how do you approach it now? And where, and then is there a synthesis between the two of how you would advise other people to write? To write. How can they approach it? The daunting task of writing 20,000 fucking words.
Okay, so I would outline extensively. I would do so many small documents. I would write log lines, 1 paragraph synopses, 3-page synopses, 10-page synopses, beat outlines, step outlines, character bios, until I felt like I had enough to go to script. And now what I will identify is I will write maybe the major beats of my script. I always know where my scripts end, and so that's just a me thing. Like, I can't even imagine the process that some people go in where they start writing without knowing how their script ends, which is not to say that that's a bad thing. It's just I couldn't function that way. So now, so long as I've got my 5 major beats, my process is I will start out writing a 3-page summary, and they nearly always turn into 10 to 15-page summaries. And then that's the only prep I need to do before I go to pages, because then what I do is I like to find a lot more stuff while writing pages, because it's just more fun that way. Like, you know, how that breaks down into scenes and then who those scenes are with, that I like finding that on the page as opposed to pre-planning now. So maybe Draft Zero's helped me shift from that process to the latter process. Now, in both of these processes, the plot is rarely the problem. It's nearly always either character moments or how the character's journey is being conveyed to the audience that I have to go back and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. And that nearly always, all that rewriting generally happens in the first act, because the story, how the story plays out and how it ends, is what I want, how I want it to go. I just have to set up that story and those characters so that the audience goes along on that journey.
What I used to do, and funnily enough, on some level, I still think about it, is Michael's Haig had a 6-stage plot structure. And the problem with trying to, like, in a way, we're trying to outline what would be a screenwriting course. And we're not going to do that. Where there are plenty of, if you want to go and learn how to do nuts and bolts, there are plenty of online courses that will step you through it, right? But this is kind of like high level thinking from our own experience. Michael Haig has his 6-stage plot structure. You don't have to buy his books. I've seen him talk, but don't own his books.
We can probably link to just the visual graph.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we talked about it in episode 1 and 2, which is that he broke a story down into 6 stages, right? Stage 1, and basically it was Act 1 was broken in 2, Act 2 was broken in 2, Act 3 was broken in 2. This is an important point that I'll get to. Act 1, Stage 1, setup. And there is a turning point, which is the opportunity. Stage 2 is the new situation. Then there's a turning point, which is the change of plans. Act 2 is Stage 3, so Act 2A is progress. And then turning point 3 is the point of no return. Then Stage 4 is high complications and high stakes. And then there is turning point 4, major setback. Act 3 is Stage 5, final push. And then turning point 5 is the climax. And Stage 6 is the aftermath. There's kind of 2 parts that we need to separate. There's more than 2 parts. There's the concept, there is kind of the characters, and there is the plot, right? For me, character was, and I think is increasingly becoming kind of not, I've talked a lot about the running condition and the loop, and that's the stuff I'm kind of interested in now and working in writers' rooms. That's the stuff that I actually think is the most practical. I also, unlike you, tend to work with co-writers. So we will spitball characters to no end, but often we'll come back to references to, there's one character we've got in the back of our heads that we're like, she's like, this character's like Annabelle Crabb, who's like this journalist who didn't get into ASIO, and so she ends up working for a private spy company. And we've kind of, that gives us a feel of who the character is, what they want, what they need, what their flaws, their weaknesses, all that stuff. Because characters, as we talked about multiple times, are abstracted humans. They need to make more sense. They're abstract not in the sense of becoming like Kandinsky and harder to become inscrutable, but the opposite. They become simplified and more defined than real people. So often I'll think about character in those terms, and I find that exercise, which I've talked about before, about finding a person in real life and thinking of an attribute. The example I've used before is when I was waiting for a plane, the gate next to me was calling for this passenger, and it was like final call for Chas Fisher, let's just say. Final call for Chas Fisher, the plane is waiting for you. And this guy who's been waiting at the gate the whole time closes his laptop, puts in his bag, and walks on the plane. He was Chas Fisher, right? He waited for everyone else to board. All right. And I'm like, that is you can build a character around that. That says something about who they are without necessarily writing character voice documents, etc. Right? When it comes to plotting, I will use the Michael Haig document. It's a way of going, here's your beginning and the end, and you subdivide and you subdivide. And subdivision is an important thing because it's your midpoint. And as I've talked about before and we'll continue to talk about, I think the reason we have midpoints is that they keep it interesting. They create contrast. If we just stayed in stage 1 setup for 90 minutes, we would be bored, right? So the easiest way to kind of structure a 100-page document, it's a lot of writing, is to start with something like that and just write those big beats, which is what you do in your outline, and then kind of sort them. And I used to do it more fastidiously against the 6-stage plot structure. Now we write down what we think those turning points are, and kind of on index cards, virtual or real, but I'm a big fan of either, and put them down. And then you kind of organize them. And then now, because I've got more experience, going, it feels like we need a little bit more here. Okay, that actually feels like it takes too long to get out to. And that's how we start beating out a story. And then I have become a fan of scene breakdowns, they work for us. They're not going to necessarily work for anyone else, but we actually go in a screenwriting program and go scene name. And it doesn't have to be interior, but it's like either a location or a broad location house. It doesn't have to be kitchen because you're not worrying about it in terms of production, and just write the big beats of what happens. But that is like a stepping stone from here's like a bullet point outline to the screenplay. But then we'll take the scene breakdown and turn it straight into a script. But the scene breakdown, we'll try to avoid dialogue because really what we want to see is, does this scene work without dialogue? And then the dialogue is really fun to write. You know, it keeps us excited. And then you'll find new things, but you've kind of got a map of where you're going. The other thing I've noticed with our writing is that my first drafts are now really long. It's not actually a problem to write words on a page anymore. You know, on a good day, I can write 12 pages, you know, which is a lot. But of those 12 pages, maybe 6 are good, if you're lucky. But the first draft then becomes not a vomit draft, it becomes a real draft zero. The process is to then cull it back because it's the first time we've given voice to these characters. It's the first time we visited these locations. So we're doing a lot of what other people would put in short documents within the first draft, and then our polish is just like culling the crap out of that. But we're ruthless. We know how to cut. So that means we can cut like a third out. But if other people want to put that stuff in supporting documents, they should. Yeah. You know, it's the same thing.
The whole point of this is not to get prescriptive. We're just sharing with you guys as our listeners what our process currently is and how it's evolved over time. I mean, for me to write that very first script, I had to do all the things that you're talking about in very great detail. I had to write a ton of documents. And then I woke up an hour early each day and said, I am going to write 2 pages a day. And I got to 120-page draft. And 2 pages a day is very manageable amount. But I know writers who write incredible stuff that I could never write, and they do zero planning. They're all very intuitive, but then
spend a lot of time thinking.
Yeah, but then I think a lot of their rewriting process becomes then about structure, whereas a lot of my rewriting process is about effect, not about structure. So I don't really have to generally pull sequences apart or move stuff around too much. It's about taking what I've got and making it do more what I want it to do.
If I was to give people advice on how to write now, not to be prescriptive, but they don't know where to start, I like index cards, right? You can outline with index cards, get in the index cards, write your scene ideas down. I want this to happen. I want this to happen. I want this to happen. This, and this. Ideally color-coded per character. Because I'm assuming at this point you have an idea of who your characters are. Even if you don't realize it, because you're following someone, right? Even if it's all white because you're following the one character, and you start arranging the story from that point. But I think sometimes bouncing around and working linearly works. If I've done a writer's, it's almost like a writer's room strategy. Day 1, which could be like part 1, can be let's just spitball the concept and the characters and the world, right? Hey. And occasionally be like, I'd love to see that scene. Love to see that scene. Love to see that scene when you're brainstorming. And you write them down. Day 2 would be, or phase 2 would be organizing all that stuff into a plot structure. And obviously, understanding plotting takes experience, but even if you don't have experience, the only way to get experience is to get experience. And then start organizing it. And what you'll find is that maybe there'll be palm cards of stuff that you'll be like, that's a cool scene that you don't need, and you set it aside, right? But that is a way that I would work. So you kind of, the process of brainstorming and coming up with scenes is separate from the process of plotting, which is kind of a writer's room approach. And I think that's still a really great way for writers to start, because the reason that they use it in writers' rooms is it works. They may be more efficient and come up with better stuff because they're experienced writers, but the process produces material.
I'm a strong advocate of do whatever works for you. I've just started listening to Cargill, who's the writing partner of Scott Derrickson, and so they wrote Sinister and Doctor Strange together. He's got a podcast called Ride Along, and one of the very first episodes was just his advice was about set manageable goals. Even if it's only write a paragraph a day, set a goal, a daily goal that you know you can hit. so that you're not setting yourself up for failure, and you'll eventually get there. Because there's a big difference. I think we've spoken about this on different Backmatter episodes. I think there's a big difference between how you approach your writing your scripts as a process, as a craft-oriented process, and then how you manage time, procrastination, discipline, like all those idiosyncrasies of your own personality.
Yeah, and we're pretty different in that regard. I'm a yin to your yang. You know, when I'm focused, I'll produce material, but then I'll be like, I got to deal with this other thing now. Let me focus on that.
Yeah. One of the funniest experiences was last year when I was rewriting a project with you attached to direct, was you sitting in the corner while I was doing all this like work and talking out loud, and all you would do is lob in hand grenades occasionally. I think you were doing like online grocery shopping and occasionally you would say, what if we just cut that entire sequence and did this? And we would then have to argue about it. And it wasn't, and it was about the process. Anyway.
Yes, that's how I roll. So I know you're trying to say how whatever works for people, but for people who've never started, they don't know what works for them. And I'm just saying this is the advice that I'm now giving people to get them started, which is don't work linearly. If you've got an idea for a scene, write it down. Put it on a palm card. You can structure it later, because I think people get daunted by the very linear nature of final draft or fade in. And I have got a kind of a baby writer working in Scrivener, but it's a hard program to use. Index cards work, man. They really do. Like in terms of getting yourself out of your head and letting you think, oh, I've got this idea over here, but rather than you just fucking shitting all over the page. But coming back to it though, scene work is what's going to make your writing sing, you know, and that's hard. That's a hard thing, but it's a good transition into beginner's guide to draft zero, maybe.
Yep. So, for those of you who are if you're tuning into us for the first time this episode, heaven help you. So hopefully you've listened to a couple of other episodes and are just sort of hanging in to this one. But we just thought we would, like our journey through Draft Zero has been, what is our problem with our writing right now? So it's often completely without thought or relevance to the episode before or after. And so it's been a very haphazard route. And you have very sensibly suggested that we just outline a few of the strongest episodes and grouping them together by the sort of craft area of screenwriting. And so we've done that.
This will become a web page.
Yes.
Just to be clear.
We will link to it.
We'll do it as a page. We'll create a living document to make it easier for people to find areas of interest. Because obviously now with 56 episodes behind us, it's like, where do I start? Yeah. And the answer is all of it.
Yeah.
Really, ultimately, to become a good writer, you just need to know everything. And that's hard.
Yeah.
Right? We're still learning.
Yeah.
But you can't just go, it's not like how you put together your IKEA set. That's not how it works.
Yeah. And as much as we've broken these things down into sort of group headings like structure, character, scene work, dialogue, all of these things are interlinked. Like we've got one section called scene work and another section called character. And there's two of our favorite episodes, which the topic creates better scenes, but it also reveals character, and it becomes like a loop. If you've got really great characters bouncing off each other, then you're going to have great scenes. And if you write a really good scene, it will inherently reveal character. So it's not so much a chicken and egg scenario. It's just pointing out that, as you said,
it's all interrelated.
Yeah, and as you said, Stu, it's kind of like you need to know it all at once.
So I think what we've decided to do is Draft Zero tends to ice skate through a whole bunch of topics based on what we've been interested in, that we kind of need to group them into kind of like broadly themes. So we've created a web page of like a beginner's guide of where you potentially can start to cover some of the main areas in screenwriting. And also we're going to try and update our tagging system to make it easier to go, oh, I'm interested in every episode that's about this thing. Sequences, and then there'll be a whole bunch of all the episodes related to sequences, as good as we can make it. But the beginner's guide will be a webpage and hopefully a living document. And it's a good place to start if you don't know where to start other than at one. Which is not necessarily the best way to experience this.
Okay, but it does. What this does is it ties us back in a way to the purpose of Draft Zero, which is all about craft, right? And we've had some listeners come to us and say, all right, you know, you're helping me write better scenes, you're helping me write better characters, you're helping me do all these things, but you're not really helping me refine exactly what it is that I want to convey in this particular moment, or even in this whole idea or whole script. And to boil that somewhat convoluted sentence down into an idea, what Draft Zero is how in writing, but what we steer well away from is why. Why are we compelled to sit down and slog out through an enormous feature film or a pilot script?
Oh, okay. That's how you interpret the why. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Well, how do you interpret the why?
Well, why people make the decisions that they make. Why should I choose to do this? Why should I choose to do that? I can't tell you. You know, we can tell you how to achieve the effect. We can't tell you why to choose to achieve that effect. You know?
Absolutely. And to me, that boils down to, like, even if you're talking on a character or a scene level, the effect that you want to have on the audience also comes down to what is essentially, it kind of comes down to theme and message that the filmmaker is wanting to have and wanting to say and communicate.
And if you don't know that, then you might struggle. I mean, it comes down to this idea. I'm going to segue from that because that's the question, but I'm going to reframe it as a question about aesthetics. Because I had a friend of mine who's an historian, and he's got his first kind of like history book coming out this year. Like his, PhD historian, not an armchair. I'm an historian. I collect things that are old. He's a legit historian, and he's got a PhD candidate that he's supervising, and he's like, the thing with history is it's a literary discipline. There's a degree, like there is a discipline to like researching history, but the telling of the story is the art of it. He's like, and I don't quite know how to teach this guy, how to be creative. And it's like, I don't think you can. What we can teach them is a theory of aesthetics that, based in our understanding of narrative, this combination of things produces this outcome, right? It's like, coming back to music, this chord progression produces this sound. We can't tell you why to put things in a particular order to create a particular emotion. Sometimes people will, which is why people fall back on formulas. That's why music can often fall back and be formulaic, and particularly during the certain classical periods with like dances. Oh, this is a waltz, this is that, because it had its purpose outlined. So I think ultimately that's why I call what we're doing as narrative aesthetics, because it's a theory for understanding why we think stuff looks good, what feeling we think it creates, but we can't tell you why you'd want to create that in your audience. Yeah. Like we can't. That's ultimately you, and you may choose to combine things in terrible combinations. Maybe you can teach that stuff, but that's well beyond us. And obviously life certainly teaches people.
Yeah. And often I do get a note where like people just keep pushing back and back and back on a certain thing that I'm doing, and ultimately I have to say, that is what I want to do. That is, I want my audience to feel the discomfort that you are feeling right now.
Yeah, okay, I'll make a broad point, because I've had this conversation before in the context of music, but I think it applies equally to film, because they're largely both popular art forms. And I mean that not in a derogative sense, but in the sense of their kind of mission, which is there's certain music as listeners of this podcast have heard me mention before, I tend to listen to stuff that's pretty dark and pretty heavy, and a little bit out there. Possibly my music, well, not even possibly, my music tastes are certainly more extreme than my film tastes. And there's certain music that I listen to that is not meant to be enjoyed. Right? It's the musical equivalent of a Francis Bacon painting. It isn't meant to be pleasant. It's meant to make you feel something. It's meant to make you think. But being quote unquote entertaining is not its purpose. And that's okay. And I think sometimes that's okay with films. But the problem is that film, largely speaking, is an industry that requires a certain number of people in order to watch it, and therefore they get finance, blah, 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 blah. That their underlying element of entertainment is a key, is a key aspect of it, right? But films don't always have to be entertaining. And so those moments of like, maybe some people like watching films that are uncomfortable.
Well, there are films that famously are abrasive and aggressive to the audience. Like, I know, the ones that I know a lot.
Silo.
I was going to say Requiem for a Dream or
Land of Returns.
Irreversible. Those two films, I think, are masterpieces, but I will only ever want to watch them once. That doesn't make for a very good business plan.
No. But in terms of it comes to your own writing, as I think we're talking about films as a whole, but there's certainly sequences which gain a lot of power through being unpleasant in the moment.
Yeah.
I mean, we're recording this on the eve, well, it's actually come out, but let's just pretend it's the eve of Endgame coming out. The anticipation wouldn't be so high if they didn't end it in the way that they did. Even if we know it's going to largely get resolved positively, the sense of discomfort or despair that it created in the audience created an anticipation. There's a tension there that needs to be resolved, and sometimes the desire to make people feeling uncomfortable about people feeling uncomfortable is a way to actually remove tension from work, and therefore it becomes uninteresting.
Yeah,
because that's what tension is, that unbearable sense of like, I'm waiting for this to get resolved, and it's either going to be horrible or pleasant.
Yeah,
you know, which is kind of another fundamental writing principle that's hard to articulate. But, you know, tension, there's contrast and there's tension. You know, that's even more than a midpoint. The fundamental of a lot of what we have to do is to do with creation of tension, the unanswered question. You know, that was a segue for you to talk about questions. But anyway.
Well, thank you for explaining my segue. Yeah, I think this is probably stating the obvious, but I've just come to a broader understanding of all of the aesthetics boils down to, in terms of, it's particularly true of screenwriting, but it's possibly true of any kind of narrative-based art form, where you don't want an absence of questions from an audience. Like if they're not asking any questions, then they're not engaged, they're not leaning forward, they're not wondering, they're not curious. So you want questions from the audience, but I have more and more come to the feeling that all of these craft tools boil down to, in this moment, what exactly do I want my audience members to be feeling, thinking, or asking, and setting up my film accordingly. And I don't know if I have much more to say about it other than I think moving forward with Draft Zero, it's going to be like the underlying questions that I'm going to be asking, not of my own work, and also of the different topics and areas that we're tackling.
In what way is asking separate from the thinking? Feeling, I understand, is something that can exist in the moment. I'm happy, I'm sad. Yeah. It's a particular emotion. Scared.
Yeah.
But what separates thinking from questions? I guess it's kind of, to talk about the favorite, I guess, maybe it's that sense of like you are contemplating its, or thematic sequences, you're contemplating its meaning.
Yeah, but I suppose
separate from what happens next.
I guess as soon as you're contemplating, maybe you are asking questions.
You're asking questions in a different way.
Yeah.
It's a question that's different from what happens next.
Yeah.
And becomes a question of what does this mean?
Yeah.
How do I feel? What does this mean? What happens next? A kind of the fundamental question.
But even that is mastery. You know, from a craft perspective, it's I have decided that at this moment, and we looked at this a lot in the antagonist series, particularly versus audience, is when it can be in a control of the filmmaker to say, at this point, I'm going to order my narrative so that my audience sits back and actually thinks about something separate to what they're actually seeing right now.
Interesting that you've gone in that direction when I've kind of doubled down on the simplicity of for dramatic film. I think your questions are not wrong. I think they're good, but they're kind of like one step removed than when you're working in, broadly speaking, the mode of drama of what do these characters want, why can't they get it, why now? Because I think often those three basic questions are why our scenes are not working, and that stops people from asking, from feeling, thinking, or questioning.
Yeah, and maybe it's cart before the horse, but I often think that if an audience is wondering what's happening next, depending on the question that the audience is asking, you can get away with a lot on a micro level.
See, okay, I'm gonna. We're getting into a little bit of debate, which is good. I think the difference is what you're talking about are analytical tools, and what I'm talking about are creative tools. Because I think, coming back to my observation about intent versus execution, your stuff's about intent, and there's a lot of people go, well, this is what I want the audience to feel. This is what I want them to think. This is what I want them to, question. But there's no ability for them to actually determine whether or not that is happening in their material. You can easily say that, well, this is what I want them to feel in this scene, with having no comprehension that your scene is failing to do that.
Yeah, sure. And the only way I get that insight, saying what I said before, is actually through feedback, because I haven't written it to not achieve my intent, So it's only when I get consistent feedback saying this is not what I'm thinking or not what I'm feeling that I then go, well, where have I stepped wrong that you're thinking about it? And often the problem is actually they're asking a question that I should have removed from the equation. They're asking something that I should have answered earlier. And I think we're going to get into this a lot in our next episode, which is going to be looking at exposition in the later seasons, season 7 and season 8 of Game of Thrones, because they are masters at, or they've got the luxury of being in such control over the questions that the audience is asking. But I think you're right. I'm very much thinking analytically rather than generatively. And, maybe that's a flaw of mine, but I don't know. I feel that the generation is not something that I think about that often.
Yeah, maybe you should. Like, fundamentally, no one's going to look at your piece of writing. I mean, I know actually, no, this is perfect Backmatter. People are not going to look at a particular scene on, like, okay, no, I'll rephrase it. They will. They'll understand, this is what I feel, this is what I expect to feel, right? And the thing is, audience feelings or thinkings, when people say this is how I feel or think, they're not wrong. You can't argue with how your material made someone react, right? The question for you as the writer is that okay? Is this okay for them to feel that way? You might antagonize that person, may not like your material, and that's okay because it's not for them, right? It's the wrong genre or whatever. But often to fix that, you are not going to you're not going to be going and changing the feeling or the thinking or the next questioning. You're going to be relying on those things are consequences of the underlying dramatic writing. Right? And so you can only operate and ask those things of yourself if your dramatic writing is so good, and I'm not sure as yours is yet, Chas, for that to just be I am complete mastery of my craft that I can make people feel and think and question however I want them to.
Please, listeners, rest assured, I do not feel that I have achieved this level. It is more, I guess, conceptually for me, like, what is the purpose, the underlying purpose of storytelling on both a macro and a micro level, and how to identify whether my writing is working for me is if someone's asking a question at a point where I want them to either not be asking questions or asking a different question or feeling something, then it's something's gone wrong.
There's a quote from Tom Stoppard's The Real Thing that I'm going to read, which is about a cricket bat, but I'll read the whole quote. I saw Hugo Weaving perform this, so imagine I'm Hugo Weaving. The thing here, which looks like a wooden club, is actually several pieces of particular wood cunningly put together in a certain way so that the whole thing is sprung, like a dance floor. It's for hitting cricket bats with. If you get it right, the cricket ball will travel 200 yards in 4 seconds, and all you've done is give it a knock, like knocking the top off a bottle of stout, and it makes a noise like a trout taking a fly. What we're trying to do is write cricket bats, so that when you throw up an idea and give it a little knock, it might travel. Right? And for me, I boil this down to the job of articulation, and what we're talking about in terms of dramatic drama is articulation, is we make things aerodynamic, right? The better our writing, the more aerodynamic our ideas are, and those ideas can be about character, they can be about theme, they can be about plot, they can be anything, and our ability is to make it aerodynamic. And Draft Zero is about, maybe if you look at this little foil and kind of like bend the wing this little way, then maybe that idea just travels that little bit further, right? Yep. And so for me, it's like, is it useful? Like, obviously you're going to be sitting there and going, well, where do you want to place the cricket ball? It's like, well, once you can place the fucking hit a 6, it doesn't really matter where you want to fucking put the cricket ball. You got to learn how to hit the 6 in the first place.
For anyone who's a cricket fan out there, I sincerely apologise for Stu's ham-fisted analogy here.
Oh, okay. Okay, yes. You always want to pull it you want to shoot your 6 at your fucking leg stump. I don't know. Short mid, silly mid on. I don't know.
Okay, and I think I've mentioned this in previous Backmatters as well, is when I went to all that effort of writing that first script, you then gave me devastating feedback, like really devastating feedback. I'm sure if I searched my emails, I could find it somewhere, which was basically that my first script was a steaming pile of shit. And, you know, you gave me feedback for working on it, but as crippling as it was, you then sent me the David Foster Wallace.
This is what
Yeah.
There are these 2 young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And the 2 young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, "What the hell is water?" This is a standard requirement of U.S. commencement speeches, the deployment of didactic little parable-ish stories. The story thing turns out to be one of the better, less bullshitty conventions of the genre. But if you're worried that I plan to present myself here as the wise older fish explaining what water is to you younger fish, please don't be. I am not the wise old fish. The point of the fish story is merely that the most obvious, important realities are often the ones that are hardest to see and talk about.
And that excerpt helped me keep writing after having spent all this time and effort writing a steaming pile of shit, was the idea that by writing that first awful draft, I was now awakened to a whole new realm of possibilities. And here we are 5 years later.
Still exploring the whole new realm of possibilities through our stinking piles of shit. They still stink. The diet may have changed, but they still stink. I'm laughing. I don't know if there's a lesson we can draw from that. Maybe I can try. I guess what I'm trying to do is reiterate the utility
of Draft Zero.
Not just of Draft Zero, of focusing on the craft.
Yeah.
Because I don't actually give a fuck. Honestly, I don't. I don't give a fuck about your ideas if you can't articulate them. Right? On a very practical level, you can have the greatest idea, right? And this is a problem, right? So I'm going to rephrase this because I think there is a correlation between people assuming the people who can speak and write well have good ideas. And this is going to be so controversial, and I'm going to drop the hand grenade. Someone like Dr. Jordan Peterson shows the danger of that, where shit ideas dressed up in beautiful language mixed in with good ideas can confuse people, and they think because they're well articulated that they're good ideas, right? Because we've got the inverse of that. I just said that to trigger a whole bunch of people. It's also true, 10% nonsense. The inverse of that is we also make the assumption that people that can't articulate ideas are idiots. And that is not necessarily true. both because you and I have studied law, we actually know the ability to argue an idea well does not actually mean that the idea is any good. Right? That's the whole point of law, is that you argue bad ideas well. You just don't know whether your idea is the good or the bad one. But when you're talking about writing on a professional level, your job is to articulate, to make it understood. It doesn't actually, your intent will either be yours or it'll be someone else's. It's going to be someone else going, this is what I want. I want a horror film under 100 pages that we can make for $500,000. It's got this cast and it's got this feel. And you as a professional writer have to articulate and execute that, right? All the esoteric thinking about writing is you want to use that to inform your writing, but what is going to get you hired is your ability to execute. Because often in a professional setting, it's other people that are telling you where you're going to shoot your six, where you're going to kick your home goal. I don't know. I'm trying to think.
Stu actually enjoys sport a lot more than he is lying about right now.
I'm deliberately mixing my metaphors.
Yeah. I think this has hopefully been a somewhat interesting discussion for our listeners about approach. And, a lot of screenwriting is problem solving. Like, so often I'm like, I know what the idea that I want the scene to do, and I could just have two characters arguing that, but that's often the most boring and obvious route. And then the troubling thing is, how do I dramatize this? How do I turn this conflict that I want to thematically talk about into a narrative?
Yeah, because you just have to spend some time on the Facebook screenwriting group. There's a lot of people with half-assed ideas about what they want to do. That's not what makes you valuable, right?
Well, talking about value,
half-assed ideas.
I think that's I'm going to latch onto that light to guide us out of this dark cave of abstract conversation into a discussion about having your work produced, because a director brought me an amazing idea, and he is a writer-director, and he could have written it himself, but brought it to me to write it quicker and hopefully, better in collaboration. And we did, and we wrote a short, and we're really excited about it, and it's starting to get into some festivals, and we're really happy about it. But I won't start with the but. I'm going to start with I encourage any aspiring writers out there to, try and talk to directors. And, there's something about getting your work produced that is like, that's the point of this, isn't it? And, writing all the scripts in the world and never getting them produced is not the point. And there's so many things to learn from having your work produced. And there's lots of people who can talk to this. But I don't want to talk about having my work produced at this point. I do want to talk about what your expectations should be going into that kind of collaboration at this kind of career stage that I'm at, and what has been my experience coming out of it being produced. So the idea was his, the director's, and I wrote it. So I have copyrighted the script. He then produced it, self-financed it, which is an amazing honor and privilege. While I wrote it, he had a massive hand in the development. To end up with a 16-page script, it took almost a year of back and forth between myself and the director. But we both went into it knowing that there was a feature in this idea. And the reason why I contributed my services for nothing as a writer was to have an opportunity to have a produced piece of work, which was essentially a proof of concept for a feature that I would then be able to write. And it's the same for him. He would have a proof of concept and a pitch for a feature that we could then get, commercial interest in and go forth and be produced, which is fantastic. And we had these expectations down in writing going into it, which I strongly recommend anyone do. Like, get something in writing. It doesn't have to be a legally binding document. It doesn't have to be an option agreement. All those things would be good, but get something in writing as to what you believe your rights and expectations are moving forward. Where it's been really difficult coming out of this process is that the script has been a success, as much as a short rom-com about vasectomies can ever be, but just the heartache of getting a feature project up, especially in Australia, but I imagine this is the same everywhere, is lots of people want to buy a concept and buy a proven idea, and there's a much bigger market for buying a concept than there is for funding a feature film. And what do I mean by this distinction is that there would be a lot more opportunities for him and I to sell the idea that we've got, or even write up a pitch and sell the pitch, or even get to the point of writing up the script and selling the script. But that's not why he has invested his time and money. He wants his, this to be a leg towards his first feature film or his first, directing gig on a TV series or something like that. And one of the things that I didn't realize is that coming into this, coming out of it, even though we both want to make this project and we both want to make it together, we've got very different career incentives and career needs as a screenwriter and as a director.
Comparing it with my experience is I've never written a short film that's been directed by someone else. I've directed scripts that have been written by someone else, but the scripts that I've written that are to be directed by someone else, one of those was I was originally intending to direct, and it became clear that we couldn't get the financing with me attached. So
not because of you in particular, but you as a first-time director.
Both.
Okay.
Ultimately, it's both, which is what makes directing so fucking hard compared to writing, I think, because writing, it's a lot lower risk to hire first-time writers, and they can always get you rewritten. But they're not going to go, let's get a first-time director on board and get him redirected.
Yeah.
By someone we can trust. Let's get him to direct this from the cheap, and then we'll get it redirected later. I mean, that kind of happens in indirect ways. There's definitely a lot of stories when you scratch under the surface of editors shooting reshoots after the director's not being invited back after they've handed in the director's card and all that stuff. But they're all actual honest to God Hollywood stories that no one really tells about in the press circuit. So, but I think moving forward in all cases, there is definitely a reason to have agreements in some way. I think that's important. Yeah. Me having my stuff, I just treat, for me, writing is a lot less emotional than directing. I think for other people, it's the opposite. That some of them find directing a real craft and they find writing really personal. For me, it's complete opposite. Directing is very emotional and draining, whereas writing, I can be like, yep, I can do that. Cool. What do you want? And I'm not saying I'm doing a good job of it, but I can kind of take it in a non-personal way. Yeah. But I think in terms of projects, ultimately you're talking about the creation of intellectual property, which has value, and deciding how that project will move forward with the understanding that there can become a situation where one or two people are decreasing the value. I'm not saying this is specifically you, in your situation, but I'm talking in the abstract, can devalue a project, right? So then it's working out what is your exit strategy. Yeah. Is there an exit strategy? Because someone can come on board and go, and I've heard projects now, given the current climate, and I'm not trying to make a political comment, but where it's two male writers writing a script, predominantly female cast, and a funding body, government or private, has gone, we think we need a female voice on this in order to move to the next stage. So we are stepping you aside. For you to move forward, we need to step you aside and then put a female voice. I think as a writer, that's probably a lot easier to deal with because there are traditions and processes for managing credit arbitration. Whereas with directing, it's you could do a lot of development on script and not contribute a word and no longer be involved in the project and not shoot anything. So you don't even get an executive producer credit. So, in this case, I would say if you're a director, I would say approach material developing as a producer like option material. This is what I would say for those of us amongst directors is if you are working with a writer on developing material, option it. And that means that you have got
chain of title,
proximity, not just chain of title, but you've got proximity. So then someone else, you might then in your option agreement have the ability to sell the option agreement on or enter a genuine partnership. So even if you no longer direct it, that you're in a position of being a producer. Whereas I think writers, because fundamentally they contribute to the written material, are a little bit more protected. But that protection also makes complication is if there is a tiff between the writers, or if a producer, just say someone comes along and goes, there's two of you and you are more than a paper team, but you're not necessarily like BFF writing buddies. We only write together. There's a spectrum between we're only writing as a team because someone told us to, and we only ever write together. There's actually a whole, I think for a lot of writing partnerships, there is an in-between. That someone comes along and goes, for whatever reason, we like this writer more than you, or we're going to put in a female writer, but we want them to write with one. Have an understanding of how that's going to work and trying to put value on that. Yeah. And it's a complicated thing, but you need to have, as you say, something written down. It doesn't have to be a full deal memo, because ultimately it's just a written intention. As both of us being lawyers, you an actual practicing lawyer will know written intention will be used to inform any decision making.
Well, just coming out of this, like obviously that's the key lesson. Get your intentions written up somewhere, even if it's just in an email. But if you are in the position that I was, where you're an emerging and aspiring writer and you are writing for a director, even when the collaboration is great and even when you want to work together on the project moving forward, I think what I've come to the understanding of is moving forward that it has to be the director's project. As much as, I value my input and, I'm not trying to undermine it. It's just that it's harder for a director to get across the line, particularly a first-time director, than it is for a writer. And as a result, if you're doing anything where you're together, it's going to be getting the director across the line. And so that's my key lesson walking into this. And to be clear, I would do it again, and I have zero regrets. This guy did an amazing job. He took my work. He had faith in me. He spent a good chunk of his life arguing with me on the phone. And
that's not hard.
And I'm so proud of what came out of it. It's the first time I've had work produced where I haven't produced it. And it's such an honor, and I'm so excited to have it out there in the world. And, we are having meetings off the back of it. We are pitching it. It's just, I very quickly realized that it's not my baby to pitch. Like, I'm there to service the director getting this job.
In this situation.
Yes.
It won't necessarily. There has been cases of short films, like Sling Blade ended up being directed by someone who, I think Billy Bob Thornton directed it, and he didn't direct the short. Yeah. There have been situations where the writing has been more important than the directing.
Oh, absolutely. But I guess at some point, either the writer was a producer on that, or had chain of title, or the director of the underlying material was bought out at some point.
Yeah, well, yes and no. I mean, it could just be... There was a case with the Black Mirror episode where the writer, because the original BBC version, the writing fees were so low, they're not residual, kind of whatever reserve rights to do with like adaptations and stuff were kept with the writers.
Okay.
Or with this one particular writer. Yeah. So in other words, the writing agreement on this particular episode of Black Mirror, I can't remember which one, meant that they had the right to produce the film and exclusivity over television adaptations, but not feature films. So the writer turned it into a feature film and then sold the feature script. There are ways that you can do that as a writer. And so with restoration, and I'm still working with that producer, but part of our agreement was that the right to produce restoration was non-exclusive. Both in terms of derivative material, so it'd be derivative rights, both in terms of the derivative rights and remake rights. So with restoration, we could have sold the script to someone else to remake, or we could have we could have sold the derivative, like, so the feature or a television series or a stage play or a musical or a comic book or whatever. And so that can be something that if you are working on a short film level that you can think about doing, that you can say, I'm going to let you produce this and you've got the right to produce the short film, but it's only exclusive for it to be a short.
Yeah. And that is a reflection of you having expressed your intention and having that captured in writing, in fact, contractually, but before going too far down the road.
Yeah. Kind of helps when the producer at the time has a lawyer and I've got a law background and I now have a lawyer. So it kind of, yeah. But I think it's making sure that you understand the intent, but also understand the possibilities of intent, which is why I'm talking about derivative rights, because I think it's probably something that emerging screenwriters are probably not even aware is something that you can carve out separately. Right. And I'm in the process of negotiating an option on a short story, and derivative rights on the short story is something that is part of our option, because we may be able to get a cheaper option if our purchase price option doesn't include the TV series, for example, or, we have to be very clear about what areas of exclusivity we're taking. But I think that's a good option for a feature film. For a short film, sorry, if you're writing a short for a director. But your specific instance is different because it's the director's idea and he had written material that was speaking to it. So he's at least got, an idea in a fixed form, etc., etc.
Yeah.
God, we just turned into an episode of Script Notes for a brief moment. Umbrage.
Well, no umbrage at all. It's more.
I'm Craig Mason. I'm the Craig Mason of Draft Zero. Everyone fucking knows that. You're the robot.
So I've only got one final topic to cover in this Backmatter episode, which is broadly under the topic of forgiving yourself for not writing. So, I am considered within my circle of writing friends fairly prolific for someone who has a full-time non-writing job. I will generally produce 2 to 3 feature scripts a year, and I'm quite disciplined in my writing, and so it's become part of my personality, but also part of my enjoyment of life, right? Like, writing makes me happy, and I always applaud the Script Notes episode where they brought on a psychologist. I think it was Palumbo, or psychologist, who was talking about, like, it's okay to quit. And I do applaud that, because there have been times when I'm like, the amount of hours that I poured into this over the last number of years, like, surely there would be something better to pour my time into. But ultimately, because I get pleasure from it, no, it hasn't. I'm still hanging in there. But in the last year of my life, my father-in-law was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's.
God, you're opening up with the whole horrible backstory.
Well, I want to give a brief summary to give people an idea of the scale of it. My mother-in-law has been diagnosed with terminal cancer. My wife is their only child. And in amongst that, my aunt has died, who's my mother's only sibling. And my wife and I have had our own kind of separate problems. And we've got 2 small fucking children, which are their own massive time suck. So it just means...
There's me, and who's the other
one? And in amongst that, very little writing got done in the last year of my life. And so part of me despairs because I've lost that therapy. I've lost that part of my life that brings me joy. But on top of that, it's made me go, oh shit, I'm not producing new material, which means I'm not, keeping my contacts live with new stuff, and I'm not like pushing my career along, and I'm not writing that next thing that could be the thing that starts it. And suddenly, not only do I have all this other shit, but I'm also beating myself up for not writing. And I'm just here, I guess, wanting to say to all the people out there who, I listen to these podcasts like the Ride Along podcast where he's like, just set a manageable goal every day and hit that. And I'm like, I can't even do that with where I'm at in my life at the moment. from someone who was incredibly disciplined to not even being able to say, I'm going to write a page a day or even a paragraph a day. Like, I don't have that space in my life. And I want to, I guess, say to the people who are struggling for whatever reason with writing that it doesn't mean you've quit if you don't want it to mean that you haven't quit. And that's where I'm at. I haven't quit, but I'm forgiving myself for not writing as much as I had. Because...
You are forgiven.
Thank you. Because beating myself up about it is helping no one. It's not helping me write more. It's not helping my life situation.
In fact, it can actually kind of produce its own writer's block because you end up spending emotional energy in feeling guilty about not writing, when that maybe you can get tiny little bit, you can accumulate that kind of little fucking grease at the bottom of the tank and scrape it together, and you might find some time to write.
Yeah.
Emotional energy, because often I am not going into my shit, but I've had a pretty bad, in different ways, bad to you, and I mean,
you can't compare.
You can't. I've had my own things to struggle with in 2019, and I've just got no gas in the tank, right? I did hand in 2 scripts in fucking January, and it's kind of burnout on top of the personal stuff, right? You know, having 2 scripts due in January, I cut 100 fucking ads in 2 months for a huge project where I was like sleeping in the office and all that shit. Like, I was exhausted, and then other shit came on top of it, personal stuff, and I just got no emotional energy to put in writing. And I love writing, but writing drains me emotionally, right? Like, it should. You know, it uses, you know, when I'm writing well, it uses parts of myself. You know, I'm one of those people that cries when they write, right? I'm like, oh, this, and not in like I'm writing, like not as in writing as therapy, but, you know, I get into the emotional experience of writing. And God, we should put it right up front, and we're going to put it right front. My one piece of advice, which I got back in film school and is always, and only gets more true every year I write, which is write the experience. That's the fundamental thing of whatever you're doing, whether it's drama, comedy, whatever, like non-narrative, blah, blah, blah. You're right. In terms of a selling document, write the experience. Work out, your job as a writer is to work out how to write the experience of whatever it is you're trying to make. Put that in the front of the episode and we don't have to include it. But if you've got just a no gas in the tank, there's nothing to draw from. Everything I'm going to write is shit. So, and me feeling guilt about not writing, which I do, because I've had a friend going, are you finding time to write now? Like, I know what's going on, but you should find to write. It's not you. It's like, that just makes me feel worse. And that me feeling anxious about it just burns whatever little bit of fuel's left.
Yeah.
You know? But at some point I know, because I'm different from you. You're a lot more disciplined. I'm like, I got a project on and then we got a deadline of 2 weeks. Go crazy. You know? Because largely I've had a lifestyle where I can rejig stuff around to make that work. But at this point, I can't even do stuff. But, you know, thinking back on it, there's kind of a couple more personal, like, journal-y stuff that I've written. And I've stopped writing in my journal, but I've written some weird kind of self-reflective Facebook posts, which were serving as a form of writing. Yeah. You know, but they're not narrative.
But they're feeding that itch. Now, I guess I want to couch this in the warning is, yes, forgive yourself for not writing. Right. But so there was a couple of points where in this journey, I was feeling that I needed to write, and I actually managed to negotiate with everything that was going on in my life and build time to write, and found that hour and a half, and I sat down and I just had nothing. Right. And I ended up playing iOS games for an hour and a half, and then felt guilty because I'd wasted this time that I'd fought so hard to have. And so it's not about, you know, I don't want to, I guess, endorse people giving into the fallacy of, oh, I'm struggling and I can't write under these circumstances or what have you. Like, I don't want to get in the way of people doing what they need to do to get to the point of writing, but I am there again where I can write again. And it's just been about making that time available and not putting pressure on myself to do it or not, but just making the space available in my life.
Yeah. I guess there's a quote which I'm not going to endorse, but I'm going to say it, which is writers don't fail, they just quit. And the problem is it assumes that it's a binary, and unfortunately the problem, so many things in this world is they're not binaries. We just like to make them binaries, right?
Yeah, like character decisions in an upcoming episode of Draft Zero.
Well, everything. We like putting into binaries because it's simple, and the sad truth is the reason we feel the need to do that with is just because everything is just fucking shades of grey. And I think then therefore it's easier to go, well, if I'm not writing, then I've either quitted or I've failed. And because I don't believe in failure, that means I've quitted. And it's like, well, no, but maybe it'd be a long time. And what does it look like? I mean, I'm far less concerned about my screenwriting career than I am about my directing one. But that's a conversation for a podcast called Take Zero, where I talk about directing. Not this one. But I think it's important to say it's okay to take pauses and to replenish the well, which we've talked about before. Sometimes you need to go and just watch stuff that's creative and find that ways to, self-care has become a term that goes around a lot. But I think also when you're an emerging creative, burnout is a factor, right? And that we often think about it, burnout in the context of work, and certainly because I'm freelance, my whole life feels like I'm teetering on the edge of rejection, that there's some point when you're like, yeah, I got no more energy to deal with rejection in every facet of my life, that we actually feed our own burnout with our hobbies, as quote unquote hobby of screenwriting. Well, if you're not getting, or in my case, and yours too, it's semi-professional. I make money from writing, just not a lot. But you can suffer from burnout, you know?
Definitely.
I don't think burnout is exclusive as much as those articles to, oh, you're working in a creative field, or you're a lawyer, or you're all this and all that. And it's like, well, you can just be burned out from fucking life, you know?
Well, I guess sorry to end on such a depressing topic, but I hope that it's something that is relatable to our listeners and that people can actually take heart from. I
don't think the thing with writing is that, to me, it's not depressing. Like, maybe I will not pick up the keyboard pen for 10 years, but I can because the cost of entry is so low. And one of the advantages of screenwriting, unlike directing, is that it's free and that largely they only give a fuck about the written words on the page, you know? Like, yes, meetings are part if you want to have a screenwriting career and all that stuff, but if you just want to write something that people are potentially going to make, and that may be the one thing you ever do, and that's fine because that's what the process of being an artist is sometime, you can do it. And I'm that may sound like me being negative, but it's actually like a positive. It's always going to be there. It's not going to run away. And yes, you might get creaky or get a bit rusty, but it's not going to disappear. I guess it's like riding a bike in that sense. You know, not going to be like when I turn up to a meeting trying to convince people to finance my feature when I'm like 40-something and washed up. That's different.
Yeah.
That's a sour note to end on.
Well, on a positive note, we would love to thank our Patreons. I feel us diving into Patreon has been a real success for us in that we were looking for ways to, in amongst full-time work, trying to write and to record Draft Zero plus life shit, find a way to incentivize us to release more Draft Zero more often. And we could have done that through advertising. We could have done that through paywalls. And I think Patreon has been by far the best way to do it. We still haven't hit the levels where we could employ someone to do post for us, which would allow us to get you guys more Draft Zero much more often. But the money that you guys do contribute has definitely, you know, it may feel to you guys, dear listeners, that we don't get episodes to you very often, but trust me, your contributions are making them get to you more often than they otherwise would. So thank you so much to all of you, our patrons. Stu and I have had various conversations where I thought we would get like 100 $1 Patreons, and what it's turned out to be is we've got very, very few $1 patrons and a whole lot of top tier patrons who want to engage us with dialogue, who seem to like what we do and really want to support us. So very huge thanks to you guys. Stu, I think you said that, you know, one of the things that that your money is going to is already we're trying to do transcripts and trying to get them up on the website, and that's already yielding some results. Some humorous.
Yeah, we're doing computerized transcripts partly because podcasts are great as an audio form, but if you're, not everyone can hear, and having transcripts available, ideally cleaned up by a human, so it's accessible to a wide variety of people is important, but it's also important for like searching and cross-referencing and in future
archiving.
Some of the archiving, there is tech coming with podcasts, like podcast players where you can search within an episode and jump to specific parts of the episode based on search results. That will be tied to the transcript, so that's awesome.
All that said and done, particular special thanks to Carrie Harris, Devon, Paul Gregory, Chris Walker, Crob Edmonds, Rob Draper, Daniel Branicki, and Sandra. Bless you, Sandra.
Yeah, and if you want to become a patron, we'll include links in the show notes. You'll also get access to discounted merchandise, but if you prefer just to buy a hoodie or a shirt or a pillowcase or a tote bag, there's a link in the show notes to our TeePublic page. More designs to come soon, but you should just buy the current design. I certainly rock it all the time. Chas is not cool enough, so I wouldn't let him have one.
The biggest incentive for our patrons appears to be like voting on our homework. So if you want a chance to vote on the films that we consider, that's one way to get involved.
And I guess, we're just, we're rambling at this point, or I am. Speaking about the regularity of the episodes, I think we've reached an interesting point. We had this conversation before we recorded this, but it's worth kind of ending on that. I think when we first started out, there was a bunch of really clear or seemingly clear topics we wanted to cover. Midpoints, point of view, status. Yeah. And then we had a few examples like Tarantino, TV pilots. But as we've developed, we've covered a lot of those simple topics, and now we're getting interested in stuff that's, for lack of a better word, esoteric. And it could be, realistically, that we end up releasing fewer episodes, but each episode being a deeper dive, if we can motivate ourselves to do homework. For example, and I'm not making no promises, because it's taken us over a fucking year to do, get around to Sofia Coppola, but it'd be fucking amazing to do the The Shining.
The Shining.
The Shining. It's The Shining. The Shinnings. To do The Shining, read the book, look at the Kubrick movie, and look at the television series and kind of compare the adaptations. To me, that would be a really fascinating exercise that would probably encompass a whole bunch of other shit that we've learned. But that's a serious amount of work. So it's very possible if we decide to go down to, basically we'll be doing like Game of Thrones, like season 7 and 8, where it's like, we're only going to do 6 episodes, but they're going to be like double length episodes, and you're going to wait 2 years for it. But that'd be awesome. But that's why we do a per episode model for Draft Zero rather than a monthly. Because that means you only pay for when we release.
So thanks, everyone. We will see you soon with the promised Game of Thrones episode, and upcoming episodes are, as Stu has said, the long-awaited Sofia Coppola episode, as well as more explorations of character journeys. If you would like to argue with either Stu or myself about anything we've discussed in this episode, you can find many ways of contacting us at www.draft-zero.com. And there you will also find the show notes for this episode, as well as links to spread the word about this podcast on Apple Podcasts. And if you're feeling even more supportive, you can also find links to our Patreon page. Thanks.
It takes a while. It's going to take you a while. It's normal to take a while, and you just have to fight your way through that.